Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the classic original 62 book series. And it's book number 50, Calling All Creeps. Now, Calling All Creeps was a story that I loved as a child. My first exposure to the story itself was actually a VHS copy I had of Calling All Creeps that I got from my next door neighbor. And I remember I traded a few things with her to get like 2 or 3 Goosebumps tapes that she had recorded from I don't know where, but she just had the episodes on tapes. I think she had like Revenge of the Lawn Gnomes, this episode, and maybe The Girl Who Cried Monster. And this was an episode that I would watch a lot once I got that tape. And I never got around to reading the book from memory until around 8th grade when I got back into Goosebumps again, once Cartoon Network started re-airing the classic 90s show. And it brought me back to Goosebumps, and I wanted to get around to reading the books I never got to read. And once I read this, I realized that I loved this book, and this became a middle school favorite of mine, which stuck with me for all these years. And I've been holding off on this book because I know how much nostalgia I have for it, so I don't necessarily want to get through all of my childhood favorites. I kind of want to savor them from time to time, but I got to this one because if you haven't noticed, I've been in a reading slump for a little while, but I think I'm out of it now, and I wanted to pick a book that I wanted to read, and this is one I've had on my list, so I decided to read it for this review. And I have to say, as an adult, I'm at a hard confident that this is one of the better Goosebumps books ever made, or maybe one of the more well-intentioned ones. And what I mean by that is, very rarely in Goosebumps do you have books that are very open about being a commentary and saying something with the story. And this is one of the few books that I can openly say I think is completely thematic driven. And I don't know if R.L. Stine or whoever wrote this book, there's some consternation about who wrote what and what specific time or era of Goosebumps. That's up to you to decide and use at your discretion. But whoever wrote this book, I think, had some sort of inspiration or idea, and they wanted to form a story around it. And that idea perhaps has to deal with power and how do you acquire power, or what power means to the little guy. So if you've never read Calling All Creeps before, go into it with that mindset that this is trying to say something. And I think that this would be a great book for you to experience if you're into that stuff. I know I've brought this book up in the past in previous videos about great books for beginners of Goosebumps, and I still maintain that this is one of the best books that you can possibly start with in the series, because it shows you the capabilities of what R.L. Stine can bring to the table. It's a pretty straightforward story. It has one of the most iconic twist endings in all of Goosebumps history, in my opinion. And it has one of the best main characters, in my opinion, as well. So you can't really go wrong with reading this book. So if I had to say anything else before we get into the plot overview, would I recommend this book to you all? Absolutely. If you have never tried Calling All Creeps, the book, you should go pick this up and read it. You won't be disappointed. And also, fun fact, I think for the PS2 version of Goosebumps Horrorland that came out in the late 2000s, there was a reprint of Calling All Creeps given out with that game. I don't know why they went with that book. Maybe it was the green color on the reprint. I couldn't tell you, but some people out there might remember getting that book with that video game. And if you did, let me know down in the comment section if that's what happened. So with that out the way, let's get into the plot overview of Calling All Creeps without giving too much away. So the story is surrounded by our main character, 6th grader Ricky Beamer. And Ricky is a nerd at his school, and he doesn't have any friends. And in the beginning of the story, he is sneaking out of his house one wintry night. There's snow on the ground. It's very cold. He has to wear a thick parka jacket to stay warm and what have you. And he's headed off to his school so he can make it to this room that houses the local newspaper so he can sabotage something in the paper, let's just say. But Ricky, since he's so open in his monologue, he starts you off in the story with events that transpire later, or at least what's current to him. And he has to go back in the past and give you some context before he catches you up of necessarily what is being put on the computer. So once chapter 1 is done, we get sent back a few days beforehand, and we learn some background context of why he's doing this and why he's trying to get revenge on this girl. So the story kicks you back up to speed with Ricky. He's in his class one morning doing some homework before a quiz because he doesn't want to get wrapped up in that and not be prepared. And this new girl, Iris, comes into the classroom, and Ricky notices her and thinks that she's kind of cute and sees the possibility of maybe befriending her because, according to Ricky, every kid at school calls him, I think it's Stinky Ricky or something like that. Sticky Ricky or Ricky the Creep, stuff like that. Just really mean things to try to put him down and make him feel horrible about himself. Well, he's tasked by his teacher to take Iris under his wing and show her around the school. And he does so and notices that she kind of likes him. And he starts to wonder if she might be into him or might want to be his friend. He doesn't know, but he's glad that somebody for a change is actually nice to him. But we, of course, get to see him interact with some other kids. There's a group of 4 kids led by a kid named Wart. And Wart is a grade higher than Ricky, as well as all the other kids. And they just love to pull mean pranks on Ricky, like trip him and, do things to him that, nerds typically experience in media. You can kind of formulate anything, and that probably happened to Ricky, although it doesn't happen on page in the story. You get a feel for Ricky, and you really empathize with him. And what makes Ricky a great character is that he doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't over-dramatize the events that are happening to him. He's very open in his monologue, saying that, hey, these guys are jerks. Hey, I was very awkward when I said that. Hey, I shouldn't have done that. I let anger get the best of me. Stuff like that. So you're going to notice that Ricky is easily one of the most relatable Goosebumps characters I think ever put to page. And it's so nice for that. Well, as the story goes along, we get caught up with Ricky and some drama that unfolded that started a chain of events. And what happened was Ricky, he is a part of the newspaper, which is a mandatory extracurricular activity he has to do in his middle school so he can graduate 6th grade and move on to the 7th grade. And there's a girl named Tasha who is possibly the person in the beginning of the story that he's trying to get revenge on. And she is a mega B, to say the least. She runs the school newspaper, and she's absolutely horrible to Ricky, just like everybody else. And she constantly gives Ricky crap assignments to do, and doesn't post any of his stories in the newspaper, which doesn't necessarily bother him, but he's always wondering why even do these stories if you're not going to put them in the paper. It just feels very insulting, right? So Ricky begrudgingly goes up to her and asks for some material, which she doesn't have anything. And of course, these other 4 bullies that are older than him happen to be in the nearby vicinity. He picks up a can of Pepsi and wants to take it and drink it, but the bullies want to take it from him. It causes a whole event where the can goes flying and ruins Tasha's computer. And Tasha essentially throws him out of the newspaper and says, get lost. And Ricky's maintaining his story that Wart did it and his friends are behind it and he had nothing to do with it, but she doesn't want to listen to it. Well, it comes to a random, I think, Saturday or whatnot, and there's a school car wash event. And Ricky's obviously not going to go because he doesn't have a reason to go, and he has no friends there that would want him there, and he would just be humiliated. Well, he gets a call from Tasha saying, I know I threw you out of the newspaper, but I need you to do this story, and I'm only asking you to do it because I have no other options. So Ricky's like, you know what? I know she's trying to insult me, but I'm going to do it because I get to still be part of the newspaper and I maybe can prove myself to her. Well, when he goes there, he immediately is again thrusted with his bullies. And his bullies know that he tried to throw him under the bus to Tasha and possibly get them in trouble. And they have a war of words, and one of them squirts Ricky with water. And he, at this point, has had enough. He had to, bite his tongue. And beforehand, he had to go up to Tasha and grab her father's camera to take with him to the event so he can use the camera to take pictures, so he can have the pictures for reference and write the story the night of so he can turn it in the next day. Well, he absolutely ruins the camera, and this sets him off in a fit of rage because he already knows he's going to be in deep crap with her anyway, and takes a hose himself and starts spraying the bullies. And the car that they're washing is actually one of the bullies' father's cars, and he sprays water in there and laughs it off and causes a big ruckus, let's just say, and he's thrown out of the car wash with a broken camera, and now he has to go back to Tasha and spill the beans of what happened. And when he does so, Tasha is like, you proved me right, you're a creep, I don't want to talk to you anymore, you're off the newspaper again, get lost. Well, this prompted Ricky to go on this revenge spree, or this revenge idea that we saw in the first chapter of the story. Now we're caught back up to that moment, and he's looking into the classroom that has the newspaper stuff inside, and he sees an opportunity to go inside and put a message that's going to be on the front page of the newspaper saying, hey, if you're a creep, dial this number, and it's going to be Tasha's phone number, because he blames her for why the bullies found out that he tried to rat them out, and he blames her for getting kicked off the newspaper the first time because she was being harsh on him, and the second time because she put him in that situation. Well, Ricky, thinking that he's got one over on her, goes to school the next day and realizes that kids are snickering and laughing at him, and he doesn't know what to think of it yet, but he seems to think that something might be off, and he learns later on when he gets home that perhaps maybe the numbers got mixed up because people are now calling him around midnight. And he calls his friend Iris, and his friend Iris actually calls him and wants to tell him something, but she can't get to it about the paper, which we later find out that is possibly related to Tasha uncovering the message and getting one over on Ricky. But once Ricky hangs up the phone with her, he gets another call and more repeated calls from people saying, hey, I'm an actual creep. What's the mission? What do we got to do? And Ricky's thrown off by these, phone calls, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. But they're insistent that they're creeps and possibly that he could be their leader. Well, the next day, Ricky finds out the truth from Iris and Tasha, of course, and he makes plans to go see Iris at a playground, let's just say. But on the way to the playground, he's abducted by his 4 bullies, and he's like, oh, here we go again. But there's a plot twist involving the bullies here, and this is where I'm going to kind of brisk by, because if I go into any specific details, I'm going to spoil the entire story from this point for you. Well, it turns out the 4 bullies perhaps might have some connection to the phone calls that Ricky was getting, and Ricky is pretty much told and shown something horrific, and now he's gone in too deep in this path of revenge for Tasha that he's gotten himself, much due to his own chagrin and to Tasha's ability to get one over on him, in some deep crap that he's going to have to attempt to find himself out of. If not, he's going to have to kind of go with the motion of the ocean, let's just say. And further events are thrusting Ricky into situations that are genuinely terrifying when you think about it, because he has a lot of power, or potential power, to do something awful to his peers, and he kind of weighs with the responsibility of that, and you see his choices and him trying to navigate that. And then, of course, he gets his friend Iris involved to try to help mitigate the situation reluctantly, and this builds up to a climactic finish, I should say, or kind of a climactic finish, where there is an event near the end of the story involving a bake sale, and we see these related events kind of build up to this point, and Ricky makes a certain choice, let's just say, to go a certain direction that might be shocking to you. And that, in a nutshell, is what you're going to expect out of Calling All Creeps, the book. So this book, I'm going to start off with some positives because I have a lot to say positive about this book. I'm going to say this up front. I think Ricky is one of the best written Goosebumps characters of all time. I have read some really great Prowse in Goosebumps before, where characters have really detailed monologue, detailing the events of how they're feeling as the story progresses. Maybe they have some good plight and humor, self-deprecation. Ricky has all those qualities that all the great protagonists in Goosebumps have, but he's also more empathetic than most because his specific situation is completely terrible. Now, it might depend on your outlook on life, and maybe you might feel more sorry for Ricky than actually identifying with this character, because not a lot of people can relate to how Ricky is, growing up in his environment, let's just say. But I think the way Ricky handles himself in the story feels authentic and genuine. He comes across as one of the more genuine characters in the Goosebumps franchise, and he doesn't feel like a piece of cardboard or a character that fits a caricature, and they're acting like a character that you're supposed to, think they look like or would behave. He kind of breaks the mold on the nerdy archetype, and he really sticks out for that. So I really appreciated that about the book. And I will say this, while the book doesn't have the greatest atmosphere in terms of its Prowse, there's not much description in the atmosphere or anything like that. I will say it makes up for this with a gratuitous amount of events that are built up that are kind of tense and kind of lighthearted and fun. I will say the stuff involving the car wash was a fun scene, just with the idea of Ricky getting back at these bullies in a fun way was kind of cool to read. Or these mysterious phone calls and these... I kind of skimmed over the surface here because I wanted to get over the hump of spoilers, but there's also some cryptic messages that Ricky gets before he, gets involved with a certain set of characters in the story, involving like red paint and, whatever have you, like these cryptic signs that are like haunting him. Some of this stuff while reading it kind of put you in the moment and made you realize the gravity of the situation Ricky was in, and it made it register not like your typical Goosebumps book. This is definitely a live and in color story, and I appreciate that for what it is. I thought the exposition in this book was kind of decent. We'll get into this in the negatives. I perhaps wanted to have done it the way the book did it, but I like how the story is framed in the first, quarter of it, like the first 40 pages. You have a chapter starting out at a certain point, and then we're going back in time and then coming back forward to get caught up to speed. I like it when books do that. I think it's a cool way to set up a story, and it's no different here. When it comes to the creeps, you might be looking at the cover here and being like, okay, the creeps, they're monsters, right? They're in the story, and I'm going to be honest, they're not like the craziest villains ever or the best by any means, but they're simply effective because there's a specific element involving Ricky with these said villains that makes them stand out compared to other Goosebumps villains, you know what I mean? There's just something about them that are memorable, and they're memorable because they have this groupthink mentality to them that makes it a little more harrowing as an individual to overcome obstacles with them. And I think that it's a really cool and neat way to have a Goosebumps villain or villains in this situation set up. So I thought that was great as well. And I think the climax of this story is pretty tense because if you haven't read this book before, your mind can go all over the place of what's going to happen, and you think you know what's going to happen, but there's a twist at the very end of the book that this book is widely known for, that is arguably considered one of the darkest moments in Goosebumps history, one of the most iconic moments of Goosebumps of all time. And for a lot of people, the twist of this book makes this book as high-hitting for a good amount of people, such as myself. I'm going to say this up front. Without the twist in this book wouldn't be what it is. But because it has that, it makes this book have a lasting legacy and makes it a must-read instant classic from Goosebumps. And to double down on that, I don't think I've ever heard anybody really badmouth Calling All Creeps. So that's saying a lot. And I think this book is a very entertaining read altogether. Unfortunately, I do have some negatives with it. And they're more hindsight issues, I think, the book has. And these are things that I don't really find to be true negatives, but these are things that I just kind of wish were done instead. And unfortunately, that's just where I'm at with it. So I mentioned before that Calling All Creeps is an open commentary. If we're going to go back to positives, I think this book is openly trying to say something with its story, unlike majority of Goosebumps stories. There's so many different avenues your mind could probably venture down with what the story's trying to say. Is it about, the saying, if you can't beat them, join them? Is it about that kind of mentality? Is it about how society is more about the status quo and reluctantly being a part of the status quo than being an individual? Or is it about power? Is it about power dynamics and people at the bottom constantly looking their way to climb up that mountain or climb out of that well and get to the top? I think the story is trying to be all three, but it doesn't have the best trajectory of getting to that point. And why I say that is because the twist of the book is honestly one of the most thought-provoking moments in Goosebumps history, involving a certain decision that is made from a certain character. And it makes you think about the journey of said character, aka Ricky. I'm just going to say it's Ricky. And it recontextualizes the whole story in a whole different lens, which is ingenious. But the way I would have planned it out is there's a whole element in the story that the creeps believe that somebody is their leader. And we know who that leader is. I'm not going to spoil who they think the leader is for you that haven't read it before. But in my opinion, I guess this is a spoiler. It's not Tasha. And I think that Tasha, from the beginning of the story, should have been implied to be this power-hungry person running the newspaper. And instead of going the whole exposition, the first 40 pages about how Ricky got to this point of wanting to do revenge, even though I like it, I think they could have scrapped that and just went full on with Ricky's power hungry too. He's on the bottom. He's trying to earn respect at the newspaper because the only people and the only social interactions he gets with the newspaper is, the only social interactions he gets is from people at the newspaper, I should say. And all the other interactions with peers he has outside of that are negative ones. And unfortunately for him, he's still stuck in a negative situation because Tasha constantly wants to put him down because Ricky actually has talent and she's viewing him as a threat, let's just say. So you can possibly go down the route where she tries to get Ricky off the paper. Ricky befriends the new girl, Iris, tries to get her on his side, but she's also flirting with the idea of becoming Tasha's friend. So Ricky tries to make Tasha look bad by staging an event which possibly backfires because Tasha gets one up on him. And then Ricky's like, you know what? Because you got me from me trying to get you, I'm going to try to get you one more time. And he tries to pull an innocent prank on her to get people to harass her because maybe you can go down the route that Tasha is perhaps, kind of phone shy, or maybe she has this thing against these 4 bullies that Ricky's also afraid of. And she knows that or maybe Ricky knows that the bullies are going to try to mess with her. Well, you can go from that point to the point of the story where Ricky starts getting the phone calls himself and build on that power struggle between him and Tasha, let's just say. And building on that to the ending, and I think this is my second facet of this negative here, with the whole message of the twist, I feel like having power be the driving force of all the things that Ricky does in the story would make perfect sense of a certain decision that Ricky makes in the end, because it ties directly to that. And you can clearly see in the text of the pages that that's what he wanted the whole time. I think that would have sent the story home way better. I think that would have tied in some symmetrical things dealing with his struggle between him and Tasha. And if you wanted to be extra with it, have Tasha have her own moment at the end of the book where she is revealed to be like the commander, like I suggested, and possibly the crowd turning against her, showing Ricky that he finally has some solidarity and people backing him or something to get him a taste of power and it makes him want more of it. You know what I mean? I think if the book had those things, this would have been an absolute masterpiece, and possibly I would even hard stamp this a top 3 Goosebumps book contender. But it just doesn't have that, and unfortunately, because my suggestions are there, it's because once you get past the kind of mildly drawn out exposition of the first 40 pages, the middle portion of the book, that, you know, that middle 45 pages, like from page 41 up until around 80 something, is a bit meandering and it's a bit mundane for my liking. It's just not a lot is going on until it starts to get going a little bit towards that back end of it. I would have perhaps liked a little more in there to spice it up than it being so simple. And you know, at the end of the day, that still doesn't take away from my opinions. Thinking that this book is a great book, though. You know, this book's issues are not as heavily weighed as a lot of other books' issues that I've covered on this channel. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I think Calling All Creeps is a guaranteed A-tier book all day in the play. Now, where I settled with it, it's obviously not getting a 5 out of 5, so it's getting between a 4.5 and a 4.9. And where I settled with this might shock you, because, you know, me gushing about it, you probably think it's going to be way higher. I'd probably give this one maybe a 4.75 out of 5 stars, or not a 4.75, maybe like a 4.7 out of 5 stars, given the issues I have. I think this is a, you know, solid A. Not quite an A+, but a solid A. It has some room for improvement, but it's still a classic book. It's still great for what it is, and I'm glad that we have this in Goosebumps, and yeah, that's all I have to say about it. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Calling All Creeps. Let me know down in the comment section if you've read this book before. Do you love it? Do you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.